Okay, let's do a deep dive today. We're looking at something that, well, it sounds simple enough. Metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, it sounds straightforward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Your body isn't using fuel properly. But the reality, as our sources show, is much bigger.
It really is. We're talking about how your body handles fats, carbs, glucose. Basically, it's energy. And when that goes wrong.
The knock-on effects are huge. We're talking type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart issues. It all links back to how your body manages or mismanages energy. Nutrient partitioning problems, essentially.
Nutrient partitioning, so like deciding whether to burn fuel or just store it away.
Exactly. And when the system's broken, it tends to store often as fat.
Right. So our sources really dig into two main types of resistance that show up here. One's pretty well known, insulin resistance.
Oh yeah, most people have heard of that one. Your cells basically start ignoring insulin
And insulin's job is.
to help get glucose, sugar, out of your blood and into your cells for energy. If cells resist, that glucose just hangs around in the bloodstream. Not good. It's a basic failure in using sugar.
Okay, so that's insulin resistance. What's the other? The one the literature suggests might be like a key lifestyle-driven factor.
There would be leptin resistance. Leptin's fascinating. It's a hormone that your fat cells actually make.
Made by fat cells. To do what?
Think of it as your body's long-term fuel gauge. It tells your brain how much fat you have stored. Crucially, it's supposed to signal when you've had enough to suppress your appetite.
So leptin says, okay, energy stores are good, stop eating now.
Ideally, yes, but with leptin resistance, well, that message gets lost.
How does that happen?
If you're carrying extra weight, you've got lots of fat cells, right? They pump out loads of leptin all the time. Your brain just gets overwhelmed. It tunes out the signal.
Like background noise it starts to ignore.
Exactly like that. So you end up with high leptin levels floating around. But your brain isn't getting the message to feel full or stop eating. It can seriously drive appetite and just keep the cycle going.
Wow. Okay, so you've got insulin resistance messing with sugar and leptin resistance messing with appetite and energy signals. It's, yeah, a perfect storm.
It really sets the stage for problems.
And this is where it gets interesting. Our sources point to some, well, quite compelling research, especially some earlier stuff, on one particular food. And it seems to have a real knack for tackling this dysfunction, specifically the leptin resistance side.
You're talking about blueberries.
Blueberries, yeah. They pop up again and again in the studies we looked at.
But like you said earlier, this isn't really about finding one magic food. It's more about what the blueberry research teaches us about the why, the mechanisms underneath.
Exactly. Understanding why things are going wrong. And there's another piece in the source material, too. This C15 fat thing sounds quite different, maybe related to cell structure and longevity.
Yeah, that's another angle. More about the cell's actual physical integrity.
Okay, lots to unpack. Let's dig into these resistance mechanisms, why inflammation seems to be the common thread, how blueberries fit in according to the studies, and then touch on the C15 stuff. Let's see what it all means for you.
Sounds good. So back to leptin for a sec. It's not just about telling the brain you're full. Some newer work suggests it does more.
Oh, like what?
It seems leptin might also signal for fat burning locally, directly in fat tissue.
You mean it could tell belly fat cells, for instance, to release fat to be burned?
That's the idea, potentially, which is pretty
It
significant.
changes things. But if you're leptin resistant,
Then yeah, not only is your brain ignoring the stop eating signal, but those local burn fat signals probably aren't getting through either. The resistance blocks it.
okay, so glucose use is hampered by insulin resistance, and fat burning and appetite control are messed up by leptin resistance. What's the common link? What's driving both, according to the sources?
The big culprit highlighted again and again is inflammation, systemic inflammation.
Inflammation, how does that
Yeah.
connect?
Think of it like static on a radio line. This low-grade body-wide inflammation creates noise that interferes with how hormones like insulin and leptin dock onto their receptors and send their signals.
Ah, so the hormones are there, floating around.
Right. Plenty of them usually.
But the cells can't hear the message properly because of all this inflammatory static.
Precisely. Whether it's insulin trying to tell a muscle cell to take up glucose, or leptin trying to signal the brain or fat tissue, the inflammation just gets in the way.
And the result is a system that can't handle fuel right.
Exactly. You've got high circulating fats because leptin isn't signaling effectively for them to be burned.
Yeah.
You've got high circulating glucose because insulin can't get it into the cells efficiently.
Which leads to that weird situation where your body can't use fuel well, but you gain weight anyway.
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're consuming energy, But the machinery to actually use that energy is gummed up by inflammation. So where does it go? Storage. Fat gain, high blood sugar, high lipids. You become, as the source material puts it, ruthlessly inefficient.
Ruthlessly inefficient. I like that. So the real target has to be calming down that inflammation, right? Correcting the inflammatory system itself.
That seems to be the fundamental goal, yes. And that's where things like blueberries, which kept coming up in the research, might play a role. There was one study published in Nutrients that looked right at this.
Okay, and what did they find? I remember something interesting comparing them to blackberries.
Yeah, that was interesting. Blackberries actually have more anthocyanins, those dark pigments we associate with antioxidants. But the study found blueberries were somehow more effective at lowering specific inflammation markers.
More potent even with fewer anthocyanins. How?
They looked at things like NFKB. That's a key protein complex that basically flips the switch for inflammation and other downstream inflammatory signals like TNF, IL-1B, IL-6. Blueberries seem better at dampening that whole cascade.
So it's not just one compound.
Probably not. The idea is the food matrix. It's the combination of everything in the blueberry, all the different phenolic compounds, polyphenols, antioxidants, working together synergistically. It's the whole package.
The whole blueberry is greater than the sum of its parts.
Okay.
And there was a meta-analysis too, right? Mentioning a rodent study.
Yes, that one used a concentrated juice from fermented blueberries and blackberries, rich in these phenolic compounds. They gave it to rodents that were basically set up for metabolic disaster. Fed diets, high in fat, cholesterol, sugar, leading to high insulin, high glucose.
Recipe for metabolic dysfunction.
Totally. And they found this juice concentrate actually mitigated the damage. It reduced the negative effects of that terrible diet. It seemed to buffer the system against all those stressors.
Wow. So even when the system was being pushed hard in the wrong direction, the compounds helped lessen the fallout.
Which points back to that anti-inflammatory mechanism, most likely. Reducing the static lets the body's own signals, like insulin and leptin, work a bit better. Plus, blueberries are low glycemic. They don't spike your blood sugar much.
Yeah.
So the sources really position them as potentially very beneficial, especially if you're dealing with this kind of metabolic imbalance.
Okay. Targeting the inflammation makes sense. Now, let's switch over the C15 thing. It feels different, not directly about inflammation signaling.
Right, it's a different angle. C15 is pentadecanoic acid. It's a type of saturated fat.
Saturated fat. Where do you find it?
The sources point mainly to certain animal fats, particularly dairy. Specifically, aged sheep cheeses seem to be a notable source. Think Pecorino Sarda from Sardinia or Pecorino Romano.
Pecorino. Interesting. And didn't the sources mention a link between places with diets rich in these cheeses and longevity?
Yeah, there's a correlation noted there.
Yeah.
Areas where these C15-containing foods are common often overlap with blue zones or areas known for exceptionally long lifespans.
Yeah.
It's suggestive.
Okay, but how might it work? What's the proposed mechanism?
It seems to be about the cell membrane itself.
Yeah.
The idea is that C15 gets incorporated into the cell membrane and makes it more stable, more structured, less fragile.
So it reinforces the cell wall, kind of. Protects it from being too leaky or easily damaged.
That's the concept, providing structural integrity, resilience against stress. It's less about the signaling environment outside the cell, like with inflammation, and more about the physical structure of the cell.
Huh. So while blueberries might be cleaning up the inflammatory noise, C15 could be like reinforcing the cellular bricks and mortar.
That's a good way to put it. And one source mentioned something pretty striking, that C15 deficiency might be the first essential fatty acid deficiency identified in decades.
Really? Implying we might not be getting enough in modern diets.
That's the implication, yeah.
Ew.
Which, according to the material, makes C15, perhaps through supplementation, a really interesting area for metabolic health and longevity research because it addresses this potentially fundamental aspect of cell health.
Two very different but potentially complementary approaches then. One tackling the signaling noise, one tackling cell structure.
Seems that way. Both ultimately aiming for healthier, more resilient cells and better metabolic function.
Okay, let's try and pull this together for you listening. We started with metabolic dysfunction, this big problem rooted often in systemic inflammation. That inflammation acts like static, messing up crucial signals from insulin and leptin.
Right, and that messes up how your body uses fuel, how it controls appetite, leading down a path towards weight gain and other metabolic issues.
So the sources suggest potential ways to sort of course correct. Things like intermittent fasting were mentioned, giving your system a break, maybe lowering some of that inflammatory noise, letting things reset.
And actively adding things that fight inflammation, like blueberries, which the research suggests are particularly good at this, potentially helping to mitigate the damage and restore clearer signaling, thanks to that whole food matrix effect.
Then there's the C15 angle, a totally different piece, focusing on the structural health of your cell membranes, maybe making them more resilient. Another factor potentially supporting metabolic health and even longevity.
Yeah, suggesting that maybe this specific fat, C15, plays a key role in keeping cells strong.
So, the really big takeaway here is that getting a handle on inflammation seems critical. It shifts the focus, doesn't it? From just managing symptoms like high blood sugar to addressing a deeper systemic root cause.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, if this low-level inflammatory static can disrupt something as fundamental as how we use energy and regulate hunger. Well, what else might it be affecting?
That's the provocative thought to leave you with. What other health challenges, maybe ones that seem completely unrelated, could also be influenced by the same underlying inflammatory noise? And could tackling that inflammation, perhaps through diet, has benefits far beyond just metabolism? Something to think about.